As the days of Noah were, so shall the days of the coming of the Son of Man be.
That brings us to Roswell, New Mexico. Alien graves. As soon as you start talking about alien graves, you got to go to Roswell, New Mexico, right? Interesting thing is that the supposed crash in Roswell, New Mexico actually didn't happen in Roswell. It happened north, kind of northwest, I guess, of Roswell. Roswell got all the fame because that was the nearest town that, they went and reported it. But David Flynn, again, went out there with a team of researchers back in 2005 with GPSs and a bunch of other stuff to go kind of check the area out where that supposed crash happened, and discovered that Roswell, well, the location of the crash was also on the 33rd parallel. And when they multiplied it by the universal constant of pi, it gave them the longitude 104. Coincidence, right? 1947. That's an interesting year. 1947, 1948. Very interesting things happened in 1947 and 1948, right? What happened? Israel became a nation in 1948, but the decree for them to do so happened in 1947. What also happened? This happened, and at the same time, somewhere around that time frame, a little shepherd boy, Bedouin shepherd boy, throws a rock into a cave, here's a jar crack, and out pops the Dead Sea Scrolls, and oh yeah, the book of Enoch that says it's for the people in the future generations going to have to deal with this stuff. Coincidence, right? I think it's directly connected to the days of Noah.
The birth of Jesus would have alerted literate first century Jews that the Messiah's arrival would reverse the sin of the watchers. And you say, that's just crazy talk. How in the world would hearing about the birth of the Messiah have made anybody think about Genesis 6, okay, the watchers thing? How does that work? It works because of Romans 10, specifically Romans 10:18 and following, Revelation 12, which is the astral signage of the birth of the Messiah, and again, various Second Temple traditions about the birth of the Messiah. Now, to summarize all that real quickly, in Romans 10, it's the famous passage where Paul is talking about, hey, how are people going to hear about the Messiah unless somebody tells them? Duh. Okay, and so we have this problem. How beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel, and no one's going to hear without a preacher, and the preacher has to be sent, and that whole famous passage. Then Paul asks a rhetorical question. Have they not heard? And you expect him to say, well, of course they haven't heard, Paul. That's why you're so exercised. That's why you're so bent out of shape here. And you're telling us we need to go and be witnesses. But he doesn't say that. Paul says, indeed they have. And you're like, what? Well, what was the other 17 verses about? How does this fit? And he quotes, as his proof text, that they have all heard, he quotes Psalm 19 in Genesis 10:18. Psalm 19 is the passage. The heavens declare the glory of God. Okay. There are four verbs of messaging in the first couple verses. Heavens declare, they pronounce, they utter, they have a voice, okay, all this stuff, and it's just sun, moon, stars, and all this kind of thing. And the line that Paul quotes is, their voice has gone out through all the earth. The voice of what? Well, the voice of the heavens. And that's the Septuagint. The Masoretic text actually reads, their line has gone out through all the heavens. And I actually like the Masoretic text there because it's a reference to the ecliptic, the line in the sky. The ecliptic is where the zodiac constellations follow on an annual basis. So I can't prove it, but what I think Paul was referring to is Revelation 12. When John says, talking about the birth of the Messiah, it's Revelation 12, he says, I looked up at the heavens and saw. I think John actually meant what he said. Okay, we've got the woman with the 12 stars around her head, sun in her midst, the moon at her feet. You can actually plot this out on an astronomy program. And when you do, there are other things that aren't mentioned in Revelation 12 that are really significant, again, to a literate person in the first century. You've got a conjunction of Regulus and Jupiter, the king star with the king planet, in the constellation of Leo. Okay, the lion, the tribe of Judah, okay? For a Gentile who doesn't know anything about the Hebrew Bible, that conjunction is important because both of them were signs of a royal divine birth. And here they're conjoined, and for a Jew, it's in the constellation of Leo. You have a 90-minute window when all these things are, it's actually 80 minutes. Somebody corrected me the other day. Got an astronomer geek out there, okay. All right, I'll try to remember that. I'll have to just throw away all my books now. But you have a really small amount of time, okay, where all this can occur. And if you plug it into an astronomy program, you get the birth of the Messiah on September 11th, 3 BC. 3 BC is not a problem. Everybody says, oh, it can't be 3 BC because then Herod would have to die in 1 BC. And we all know Herod died in 4 BC. Yeah, except for studies that have shown that 1 BC works quite well, which I've recently posted on my website. I did a happy birthday to Jesus thing on September 11th. You know, but what makes it important is that date in the Jewish calendar is Tishri 1. Tishri 1 was the date in the Old Testament when you inaugurate the reign of your next king. Tishri 1 was also thought to be the birth date of Noah. So Jesus, the Messiah, is the new Noah. Okay, you're starting to see how Genesis 6 sort of creeps into the picture here. What was significant about Noah? Noah's survival, Noah's presence on the earth post-flood signaled, was supposed to signal the end of the Watchers, the end of all this wickedness, the end of all this garbage, okay? There are passages that refer in, again, Dead Sea Scroll text to the chronology of the flood, okay, to some of this astronomical stuff going on. Specifically, they link it to the constellation of Orion, which in Aramaic is the constellation of Nephilah. Okay, it's the giant because Orion was a giant. I mean, you have this concatenation of thoughts that, again, to a literate Jew, if they had read John. Or, John, Revelation is the last book of the New Testament. So John got this information from somewhere, maybe Mary, maybe the disciple, who knows, he's one of the 12. But he writes it down. And if you had been exposed to that, you're thinking, wow, look, if this is what was in the sky, it means this and this and this and this and this. And to a Gentile, all those things are consistent because we've got the conjunction, we've got Jupiter, we've got Regulus, we've got Orion, we've got all this stuff. So when Paul says, yeah, they did know. Okay, I don't believe personally that what Paul is referring to is like, y'all know who D. James Kennedy is? Familiar name? D. James Kennedy believed that you could get the whole plan of salvation out of the constellations of the zodiac. I think that goes too far. I don't believe that. But what I do believe that you could know is that a divine king had been born. I think that is what Paul's tracking on. Again, I can't prove that specifically. There's no verse, there's no footnote in Romans 10:18 that says, go look at Revelation 12. Because Revelation 12 wasn't written yet, so we can't quote it. But I think that's what he's tracking on. But if you had that stuff in your head, somebody born on that day who turns out to be this Jesus of Nazareth, who's walking around doing all sorts of miracles and saying, like, I'm the guy, okay, that would have meant something to you. Okay, that would have meant this is the guy who is going to somehow reverse the effects of the wickedness of the world. Okay? It's not a terribly deep thought, but to sort of track with it the way they would have tracked it, is a different story.
What does the Golan Heights, Hebron, and the Gaza Strip have in common? You read those in the news lately? They were the areas that Joshua failed to exterminate the Rephaim in Joshua 15 and so forth. If you do a study of the book of Judges, the strongholds that failed to defeat Israel completely in the book of Judges are the parts that are colored on the map. Those are the territories that to this day are still remaining in dispute. And where's their capital? In Jericho, Bet Yaral, the house of the moon god. Interesting, isn't it? Isn't that fascinating? I think it's interesting. Then tell me demons are not territorial.
I don't know if you've been seeing it or not, but a lot of the mainstream news reports have been showing UFO sightings. Lots of them, increasingly so. I went on and online and found a bunch of news articles, mainstream news videos, and put together a UFO montage of recent UFO activity. I'm talking just within the last couple of years.
Scientists left baffled by an unexplained circular light seen hovering high over Moscow on Wednesday evening. People described seeing a wide circular formation in the sky.
Scientists from all over the world are trying to figure out what caused a mysterious blue light to spiral in the sky over Norway on Wednesday.
As UFO sightings go, this one was as good or as weird as it gets.
Early yesterday morning, just before dawn, this appeared in the Norwegian sky. A blue light, small at first, growing into a spiral, and then disappearing into what appeared to be a black hole.
Thousands of Norwegians bombarded the Meteorological Institute to ask what that light could have possibly been. Some feared it could have been a meteor, others a black hole, and there are even those that thought it could be aliens.
A strange spiralling white light was spotted in the early morning sky over Sydney, with even sceptical witnesses wondering if it was a UFO. The unusual sight was recorded by hundreds of people from Victoria north to Queensland.
A spiral in the sky around a bright light.
A UFO in China's skies forced Zhoushan Airport to stop operations on July 7th. Outbound flights were grounded after the unidentified flying object was detected by a flight crew. For now, the UFO continues to be a mystery.
Some Chinese residents are on edge this morning after another apparent UFO sighting. It's the second one in 2 weeks. The first sighting was on July 7th, and an airport had to be shut down.
All right, that's a UFO if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, can you identify
it? That's undeniable.
The airport had to be shut down after people apparently saw twinkling lights above the airport terminal. 17 flights had to be diverted. The latest sighting happened just 2 days ago, and people say they saw 4 lantern-like objects forming a diamond shape in the air, hovering in the sky for over an hour. An aviation expert say they don't know what it was.
Strange and mysterious lights hovering above East El Paso tonight. What's even more strange, very similar lights were spotted in Manhattan just 2 days ago. Above the skies of Northeast and East El Paso tonight, a sight that was a little more than stunning. This is what one of our photographers, Ram Moreno, caught on video. One solitary light that appears to be falling in the sky. But that light suddenly breaks apart into 2, then 3 separate lights. Those lights then just freeze in the air and begin to hover. Eventually, a 4th light can be seen. Then the lights appear to be hovering and then moving in a strange pattern. Then they all disappeared. Just 2 days ago, in the sky above Manhattan, people froze on the street there as they saw these 3 lights hovering in the middle of the day. And check this out. The 3 lights are close to each other, then spread out into this triangle pattern. Now, look at the pattern side by side. This from Manhattan and the other tonight in El Paso. I gotta tell you, they do look eerily similar.
People are looking up. It's because of a mystery in the sky. Is it a balloon, a UFO? Whatever it is, it sure has a lot of people talking. Eyewitness News reporter Jeff Begase is live in Chelsea where crowds have gathered. Jeff, what's this all about?
Well, Sade, we don't know.
That's just in the last couple of years. Something's happening and we can't ignore it anymore.
The genealogy, in a nutshell. Why are the 4 women in the genealogy there? They may or may not all be Gentiles, probably at least one of them, 1 or 2. Some people argue all 4 of them are. It's really not important if they're Gentiles, but why are they the ones included? Quote here from, her name is Amy Richter. This is from her dissertation. She says, while the inclusion of women in biblical genealogies isn't unusual in itself, there are 14 such women in other genealogies, namely 1 Chronicles 2. The inclusion of these 4 women is all the more odd. You know, who are they? Rahab, anybody name them? You got Rahab, Ruth. See, the neglected, Bathsheba, and Judah and Tamar, okay? So the quote here is like, you'd think if you were going to put in 4 important women, you'd pick Sarah, Rebecca, okay, Rachel. I mean, major figures in the Torah, but they're not in. They don't get in. The 4 that do are sort of just kind of a mystery. Again, short version of this is that what Richter does in her dissertation, it's pretty recent. She did it at Marquette, which is a school that's becoming known for Second Temple studies. Her argument is that the reason these 4 women are in the genealogy is that there is something in their story, either something they did or something done to them, that has something to do with sexual transgression and the vocabulary used to describe the person and these events borrows vocabulary from Genesis 6. And so Richter argues that can't be a coincidence. And her argument is these 4 women are in here because they're 4 women who have scandalous histories or had something terrible happen to them in the line of the Messiah. And so the telegraphing, her belief is that, and I think she makes a really good case for it, the important point isn't these women and what happened to them and the vocabulary itself, it's who they produce. Who they help to produce. Well, who's on the final end of the genealogy? It's Jesus of Nazareth. And so the one whose genealogy it is going to reverse the effects, again, of the 4 people in the genealogy that had these transgressive histories that point back in some way to Genesis 6. So she believes that Matthew essentially encrypted. I mean, for people who knew their stories, it wouldn't really be encryption, but for us it sort of is. People would have read the genealogy and asked, well, why are these women and not all the famous ones? And then as they thought about their histories, it's like, oh, okay, well, boy, her story goes back there, her story goes, they all go back there. That must mean something. Matthew's trying to tell us something. And what he's trying to tell us is that these 4 women, who you would associate as Jews with this event, they're going to produce the one who undoes this. They're going to play a role here. The ministry, again, 2 of the 3 things here are familiar to Unseen Realm readers. In regard to Legion, the exorcism of Legion is about more than suicidal swine. It's about theological messaging, which practically everything in the Gospels is. Legion recognizes that Jesus is rightful Lord of the country of the Gerasenes, which is part of Old Bashan. But in Jesus' day, it was under Gentile dominion. Now, if you look up Mark 1:24, Jesus is exorcising demons in Jewish territory. And if you compare that with Mark 5, where they're in the land of the Gerasenes, it's Gentile territory, the way that Legion addresses Jesus is significant. Because when he's in Gentile territory exorcising demons, anybody want to guess how Jesus is addressed? He is the Son of the Most High. Most High is the key term. Where do we see Most High language that matters for this whole supernatural theology? It's the Deuteronomy 32 thing. Okay, when the Most High divided up the nations, he divided them up according to the number of the sons of God. But Israel is Yahweh's portion. Jacob is his allotted inheritance. Most High is a term you would use if you recognize this is the Most High God, and the territory that we control here, that the people around us think is Gentile turf, really isn't. Okay? It belongs to him. So he can go over to the Jews and exorcise demons there, but to make the point that, oh, I'm not just the Messiah for the Jew. I'm not just here to reclaim this little thing about the size of New Jersey, okay? I'm not just here to take that back. I'm also Lord of all the territory. Okay, I'm the son of the Most High. I am the rightful heir to your turf too. And so again, it's theological signaling. So again, just hinging on, and again, this isn't new to me. Scholars have noticed this for a long time.
As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be the coming of the Son of Man. What did we talk about earlier? Fallen angel activity is increasing, and it's only going to get worse as the days draw closer to the return of Christ. How many churches are talking about this? Nobody. My friend L.A. Marzulli is fond of saying this quote, UFOs are real, burgeoning, and not going away. He's also fond of saying, rebuke first, ask questions later. Because he's got a series called The Alien Interviews, and he's interviewed a whole lot of people who claim to have been abducted and gone through horrific scientific experimentations and whatnot on them. And Dr. David Jacobs was a skeptic, was a professor at a university, and was interviewing supposed UFO abductees. And after years of doing those interviews, he came to the conclusion, the same thing. UFOs are real, burgeoning, and not going away. This stuff is really happening. But what came out of those interviews was they're not going to produce 12-footers, 18-footers, 150-footers like they did before. What they're doing right now is they're trying to genetically create hybrids that look exactly like us.
That's what the evidence clearly points to. And the person will look at the screen and say, no, everybody looks the same to me. And I'll say, see, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great? Soon we will all be together. Soon it will be wonderful. Soon everybody will be happy. Now, you hear that once. It's not a pattern. You hear that once, you just discard it. Interesting, who knows? But when you begin to hear it over and over again, then suddenly it has different meaning. This is from other people who are not aware of this testimony. And then I began to understand that what they were telling these abductees, what these beings were telling these abductees, is that ultimately this is an integration program into the society, not with gray aliens most likely, but with these hybrids who look quite human. For years and years and years, people would write to me and say, oh, well, are adult hybrids walking among us? And the answer is absolutely not. There's no evidence whatsoever that that's the case. But the evidence that I've been getting recently in terms of the goals of the program is that that might be the case. I don't really know yet. It's possible. And I am embarrassed even to say that. I'm embarrassed. And yet, it fits the pattern of all the evidence that I've been hearing for the past 20 years. It's focused on hybrids. The reproduction is to reproduce hybrids. And it does appear to be an integration program, as crazy as that may sound.
This is the testimony of thousands of people. I'm not making this stuff up. So what's that all about? One of the things that I find interesting about the book of Revelation, it talks about those who follow the beast. It says those are those whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Scripture says that our name is written in the book of life, and if we reject Christ, don't accept Christ, our name is blotted out. Well, how could you blot something out unless it was there in the first place? That says to me, God says God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance, and I believe the proof of that is He put your name in the book. And we just got to confirm our reservation, so to speak. Yes, I accept your payment for my reservation. Oh, you reject it? Sorry. It's blotted out. The ones who follow the beast, it says, are those whose names were never written in the book of life. Who are these guys? Probably people who are never meant to exist in the first place, just like the Nephilim were never meant to exist in the first place back in the days of Noah. When I look at some of these videos and stuff and look at this research, it can be really hard sometimes not to get afraid. You know, that stuff in Kazakhstan, I just put a few, that whatever it was in Kazakhstan there, that last one, really wild. And apparently Kazakhstan, I've been to Kazakhstan twice actually, and the scene, one of the scenes before that showed the news reporter and that thing hovering over the city there. That was in Almaty, Kazakhstan. I've been to missionary conferences in Almaty, Kazakhstan, right where that shot was taken. All right, so apparently Kazakhstan, whatever's going on over there, it's a new UFO hotspot. But the scriptures say the devil ramps up his activity in the last days because he knows his days are short. Daniel says that in the last days, knowledge shall increase. It's actually the knowledge. There's the hey. The hey represents the word the. It's the knowledge. I believe all this stuff we're talking about here is a part of the knowledge so we can understand the days that we live in so that we don't fall prey to the coming great deception that Yeshua warned us about.
The depravity, the key verse is Genesis 3:19. When Paul is talking about the law, okay, the law was added. It's the same passage where he talks about the law, essentially, being handed down by angels and whatnot. So I do a little bit of that in Unseen Realm, but I don't do anything with the important phrase here. It says, the law was added because of transgressions. Okay, because of transgressions. Notice it's plural. Okay, it doesn't say the law was added because of a transgression. Because what scholars typically do is they'll read Galatians 3:19 and they'll think, oh, well, the law was added because of what happened in Eden. Okay, it's a reference to the fall. And this chapter is based, again, he's also from Marquette. In his doctoral work, a guy named, his last name's Stewart. I can't remember his first name now. It'll come to me. But he did a paper at SBL, which is the Society of Biblical Literature, a few years ago. And the paper was entitled something like the law and transgressions and the bastard spirits and the birth of the Son of God. And so I looked at that in the program and I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to be at that one. Because I couldn't figure out for the life of me, what is this guy going to do? And it was awesome. Tyler Stewart, it was just awesome. And I afterwards I got his paper, but he argues, and I can give you the paper. I actually posted this on my website. And again, he said I could do that. He argues that when Paul says the law was added because of transgressions, he's not thinking about Eden. Just whose transgressions are we talking about? He's thinking of the Watchers and their corruptive influence on humanity. And so he goes through a whole panoply of Second Temple stuff and some grammatical stuff. And again, he says if you read it this way, it answers certain questions that come in the chapter later on that scholars have kind of struggled with. What was Paul thinking? Because if you're tracking on Eden, then some of the proposed answers or some of the things Paul says don't seem to quite fit. And Stewart's like, yeah, there's a reason they don't fit because he's not thinking that. If he's thinking this, then what he says over here and half a dozen other places makes sense. And so since Galatians 4, again, talks about the birth of the Son of God and in its relationship to the law and how we're heirs and sons and all this kind of stuff, he links the two things again. He's saying again, the birth of the Messiah is the real thing that would reverse the transgressions, not the law. The law was powerless to reverse these transgressions. The law was sort of like, to kind of either forestall or put a fence around or hold in the wickedness to a certain extent, but it couldn't really do anything more than that. And in fact, it became a thing that people would resist, again, because they're sinners. So it's a really interesting proposition. But I give you a whole chapter again of his argument with the passages and whatnot, and then talk about how it might fit in the bigger picture. I think he presents a really good case. The head covering, the issue there is the phrase "because of the angels," and people have wondered about, well, why is Paul talking about this head covering thing, and women, first part of the chapter they should have their head covered. Then he changes and says, well, they do have a head covering. It's their hair, and I'm telling you this because of the angels. It's like, what in the world is this guy on? What is he talking about? This is going to sound like the craziest thing you've ever heard. So I'm just prepping you. I'm just prepping you if you've never heard this. There's a guy named Troy Martin. He teaches at Xavier now, or he did when he wrote these articles. But I came across it was a series of 3 articles printed over the course of 11 years. It tells you how fast things get published in journals. But the first one was Martin's article where he argued that the head covering, the woman's hair is her parabolaion, the head covering, is actually in Greek medical texts the word for testicle. And you think, what in the world does that have to do with anything? His whole article is going through Greek and Roman, Greco-Roman medical texts and showing, and he quotes Hippocrates a lot, he quotes Aristotle. They believed that a woman's hair assisted in fecundity. That is, when a woman had sex with a man, her hair, they believed, actually helped draw the semen up into her uterus through the course of her body so that she would get pregnant. That's why you don't cut it. Okay, you shouldn't do that. And that's also why it's a shame for a man to have long hair, according to Hippocrates, because the male role is to eject semen, not retain it. It's totally bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. But when you read what they thought of the function of a woman's hair versus men, everything Paul says in that passage makes sense. Yeah. It just makes sense. But it's so foreign to us that we know where babies come from. We talk about genetics and do this in a petri dish, and they're not doing that at all. Okay, they're not doing that at all. This is Hippocrates, who at the time was like the leading figure. There's one great thing about the test of infertility. That's just great. How it involves, having a woman smell something and the hair is involved. It's just the craziest stuff you've ever read. But if that's what you're thinking, if that's what's in your head when you read Paul, you're like, oh, well, of course. Of course, when we're in church, we should wear a covering over our hair, because then it's an issue of modesty. Would you go to church and just expose your genitals? Would you do that? Would you do that? I mean, that's essentially what Paul's saying. You people are nuts. Of course, he's writing to the Corinthians, and they probably could, they're doing everything. So, he's like, you people are nuts. Of course, you should have, your head covered when you go to pray and you do these things. And of course, it's a shame for a man to have long hair, again, because he's presupposing this function. A woman's hair is given to her as her covering, as her parabolaion. This is her glory, because it helps her to have children. And children are really important, okay? And then Paul throws in this thing about, now I'm also writing this because I'm expressing my concerns because of the angels. There's only one context for that. Yeah. Apparently in the back of Paul's mind, he's like, you better get this under control. You better watch what you're doing. You better again, wear the appropriate things. You better behave the appropriate way. You want to show that you belong to a man, you belong to your husband, you're going to be modest, you're going to control your sexuality, your sexual behavior, because if you don't, we've seen what can result from that. You're being watched, pun intended. Okay, so in Paul's mind, this was a concern for him. To us, it's this most throwaway, bizarre, what in the world does that have to do with anything? But again, if you're reading it through those eyes, everything in the chapter makes sense. In terms of what we do today, I have Mennonites, in my family. I'm not going to go tell them, hey, hey, let me tell you what the head covering is really about. I'm not going to, look, And one of them is a pastor too. It's like, look, if this is what you want to do, and your teaching point is modesty, whatever, go ahead. You know, that's a good idea. You know, you're fine there. But again, it has quite a different context than what you'd think. The baptism thing you've heard about before.
On the 13th of December 1973, French journalist Claude Vorion was driving through the volcanic area of Clermont-Ferrand, central France, when suddenly he noticed a bright, flashing light in the sky, heading in his direction. And as it got closer, he saw that it was made of a grey metallic substance, the shape of a flattened bell. Claude was invited into the craft, and over the next 6 consecutive days, the extraterrestrial dictated a series of messages which are both clear and revolutionary. This is what the extraterrestrial said.
We created humanity. You mistook us for gods. We were the ones who started all the religions on Earth. And now that humanity is capable of understanding this, we would like you to build an embassy where we can land officially in front of everyone. A long time ago on our planet, we had reached a stage similar to the one you are in now. Our scientists were beginning to design life through the synthesis of DNA. The whole of our society watched with fascination as they created more and more sophisticated organisms, daring each time to make an even more beautiful and sophisticated model of living art.
Many ancient texts point to the work of these scientific creators. Let's open the Bible at the book of Genesis.
Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Genesis 1:26.
At the time, the human beings called these extraterrestrials Elohim, which in ancient Hebrew meant those who come from the sky. It's found in the original Bibles, but in more recent times was mistranslated by the word God. It's important to realize that this is a plural, the singular being Elohah. References to the Elohim can also be found in other ancient texts. For example, in the writings of the Hindu, Greek, Egyptian, and Amerindian civilizations. We can read even today about the many gods who had human emotions and who lived near or with these human beings. These gods talked to human beings and even had relations with them.
I'm not afraid of this stuff. I'm not. Actually, my heart breaks because I know how many people out there aren't going to have a clue. I mean, seriously, what's going to happen when these guys finally do pop out and said, hi, we're the Anunnaki, we are your creator. Remember the Nazca lines in Peru? Remember all the cuneiform tablets in Samaria? And they point to all of these ancient artifacts as proof that they are our creators. That's what they say. The ancient texts say that the Anunnaki created us, not God. That they tinkered with genetic material from primates and turned them into Homo sapiens. That's what the ancient texts say. So what happens when these guys park over our cities with major, mile-wide ships and make that claim? What's it going to do to the average Christian's faith? Like I said, this may sound crazy, may sound like tinfoil hat-wearing stuff, but you got to remember in Stephenville, Texas, just a few years ago, there was a mile-wide ship that parked over in Stevensville. And you just saw everything that's been going on around the world, and it's increasing. Stuff is real.
There is a very, very strange verse in Psalm 22. All of us read Psalm 22. It sounds as if it was dictated first person singular by Jesus as he hung on the cross. It opens up with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And it closes with, it's done, it's finished. And but in the middle, and we always look at that with great, it's incredible as you go through that. But right in the middle of it, there is a strange verse in verse 12. Jesus apparently saying, many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. Now Bashan is what we call the Golan Heights, and it was well known as cattle-raising country. Bulls of Bashan was an idiom. It may be that's what he means. A bunch of cattle down there? I don't think so. I suspect, don't know this, I'm just guessing here, but I suspect this is a demonic phrase. that the bulls of Bashan is referring to something supernatural.
But, thank God, Scriptures say, fear not, for God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. How many Christians do you know are walking in power? Now, I'm preaching to myself. All right? We've got to understand this power stuff. Everybody says God is in control. I understand that. God created the universe. Of course he's in control. However, the same God has bound himself by his word. What did he say? Go, you human beings, go have dominion on the planet. Dominion means have control. God bound himself by his own word that everything that takes place on this planet is going to be done by man. But he says, I'll help you. Go all the way back to the Torah. Moses is standing there. 2 million Jews. Pharaoh's army coming in the back, ocean in front. God, what do we do? What does God say? What are you looking at me for? You got the rod, you do it. That's my paraphrase. God told Moses to do it. Moses raises a stick. God worked through him. Ocean split. They go through. Same thing happens all through the Scriptures. That's why God had to come to earth as a man in the first place. Because he said everything that's going to happen here is going to happen through man. So when we're all like, God's in control, he's saying, yeah, but I put the control in you. You guys got to do stuff. I'll do it through you, but on earth it's got to happen through you guys. These things have I spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. Not freaking out. Don't go nuts. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, whoever them they are. Because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world or in the sky. I would submit. I've used the word Yeshua quite a few times, and I've already said it before. I've become very fond of that name. You know, like I said, I do believe there's power in the name of Jesus. I got saved in the name of Jesus. I've led people to Christ in the name of Jesus. I've seen people set free, healed, and delivered in the name of Jesus. But the name Yeshua is extraordinary. In Hebrew, it means salvation, but every Hebrew letter has multiple meanings. There's a Hebrew idiom that says every Hebrew letter has 7 meanings and every word has 70. And the reason they say that is because with the 7 meanings for each letter, whenever you take letters and make words, you can see how each word can have a multitude of meanings based on the letters that comprise the word. So if you look at this amazing word, salvation, Yeshua, the name of our Savior in Hebrew, reading from right to left, it means the hand that destroys the establishment of the eye. Our buddy Nimrod, that we talked about in the previous session. He is the one that destroys the eye in the back of your dollar bill and everything associated with it. Here's something really cool. Remember we talked about Mount Hermon, where it was located? This is the mountain range right here. It's a very interesting conversation took place at the base of Mount Hermon right here. Caesarea Philippi. Is where at the end of Jesus' ministry, he took his disciples and he says, who do men say that I am? That was a strategic location because right there is the altar of the Greek god Pan. Pan was the Greek god of shepherds. So the good shepherd stood in front of the Greek god of shepherds and said, hey, who do people say that I am? Oh, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah. No, Peter understood. Just off to the right of that location where Pan was is a foothill, and at the top of this foothill is the fortress of Nimrod. The first Antichrist who tried to create a one-world system without God. In fact, his desire was to kill God. If you're looking at the altar of Pan, Nimrod's fortress is to the right. To the left is this location right here, which is the gates of Hades. He was standing right next to the gates of Hades when he said, the gates of Hades will not prevail. He was standing right next to it. You can go there today. I've always maintained Hades is not just a place, it's the brother of Zeus. 6 days later, Scripture says that Yeshua took Peter, James, and John to the top of a high mountain. Well, Mount Hermon is by far the highest mountain in the region. They're in the area anyway, so most scholars believe, as I do, that is the location of the Mountain of Transfiguration, where today there is a UN radar outpost sitting on top of it. Right across from a cross that people have set up as the location believed to be where the Mountain of Transfiguration took place. What's the UN doing with a UN radar outpost on top of the spot where the fallen angels landed? I understand the strategic location, Syria and all of that, I get it. But from that location, they can right down into the valley to the very location where the 200 watchers came in the days of Noah, or days of Jared, I should say, right? Pre-flood world, Genesis chapter 6. Yeshua could look down, and the UN can look down there today. Why did he bring his disciples there to ask that question? I could never understand that, because he gets so excited when Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And you read Yeshua's response, right? He gets so excited. I'm like, why is he so excited about that? When the day he was born, angels declared he was the Son of God, right? As he got older, everybody told him he was the Son of God. He picks Nathanael to be a disciple, and he says, "You are the Son of God." He says, "Why? Because I saw you under the fig tree?" You're going to see greater things than that. Every time the demons possessed people saw him, they threw themselves on the ground and cried out, "You are the Son of God." And he told them to be quiet. So from the day he was born and all through his life and all through his ministry, people told him he was the Son of God. So what's the big deal when Peter says it at the end of his ministry? His destination was Jerusalem. He takes a massive detour and goes all the way up to the top of Israel, to the base of Mount Hermon in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, parks in front of the Greek god of shepherds, says, "Who do men say that I am?" Some say Jeremiah, some say Elijah, some say one of the prophets. Oh, if I was shooting the scene as a filmmaker, I would see it like this, where Peter is looking at Yeshua and his back is to the altar, and it's called a rack focus. Yeshua goes out of focus, Pan comes in focus. This is Peter's point of view. Pan goes out of focus, Yeshua comes back in focus, and Peter goes, "Oh, I get it." See, he understood the book of Enoch. That's clear. We saw that in the other scriptures, right? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, not the son of Zeus. Oh, yeah, that's right, Peter. And upon this rock I'm going to build my church. Not these rocks behind me. That was an altar that looked very similar to Petra, like a city in the rock. It was a big embedded, place in the rock for Pan. From that location, Yeshua could look down to the gates of Hades and the altar of Pan, the Mountain of Transfiguration, where, if they use the Rocky analogy, Mickey and Polly showed up to give him a pep talk. Moses and Elijah, right? You can look down to the fortress of Nimrod. It says that from that point on, after he left from that experience right there, it says he went preaching about his death, burial, and resurrection. And he headed straight from there to Jerusalem, where he would go 15 rounds with the devil, so to speak, and still be standing when it was over. That's why he took him to Caesarea Philippi, because that location, remember the first prophecy in the Bible, the seed of Eve will crush the devil's head. So the attempt was made on Mount Hermon. So right before the big fight, Yeshua went to the very spot where that plan was hatched to try to prevent him from existing in the first place. He looked down and said, "Yeah, I got your number, Nimrod." Pan. All right, you just wait. And what's amazing is it says that he first went down, where did he go after he died? Remember? Went down into the depths of Hades. And he preached to those in prison. Horrible translation. Caruso. He heralded in victory. Tartarus, to the prison of the gods. He went down there and said, "You tried to stop me. I won. I'm taking the keys. And oh, by the way, I'll be back and it ain't going to be good for you." Rob paraphrase. That's what our Savior did. That excites me, man. That just charges me up. And that explains the question, who do you say that I am? I believe that this revelation is something we need to get for such a time as this. What did he say? "Upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it."
The Second Temple Jewish profile of what they expected as from a Messiah. And also, in turn, what they expected about the great messianic enemy. Because in their mind, there's Messiah, okay? He's going to come at the end of days and all this stuff. He's going to get rid of the oppression. Well, he has an enemy. So to a Jew, what did that enemy look like? How did they think about it? Again, this great messianic enemy. There are certain things about the enemy's profile that in Jewish texts, again, of this period, were linked to certain figures in Jewish demonology. One of the main ones is Belial, It's also spelled as Beliar in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The belief was that the great enemy of the Messiah, catch the reasoning, since the Messiah was the Son of God, the Son of the Most High, again, this divine Davidic figure, therefore there were Jews who speculated that his enemy would also either be the incarnation of or under the control of Belial, who was one of the Dead Sea Scroll terms for Satan. There were also, though, other Jews who thought, well, okay, it could be like an incarnation of Satan or something like that. And that's very familiar to us, the way, sort of Antichrist thinking is popularized. That's the normal one, again, for our day and age. But there are other texts that thought, well, no, wait a minute. Maybe it's not the incarnation of Satan himself. Maybe it's the incarnation of one of the fallen watchers. Because there are certain ways that the great enemy is described that link back into the Greek story, classical Greek story of the Titans, which again, if you're familiar with the story of the Titans, and I go through this in the chapter, there are very explicit connections between the Greek Titan story and the Book of Enoch and Genesis 6 language, and just general giant language in the Old Testament transmitted through the Septuagint. One of the ones that I talk about is Belos. This is actually a description from it's either Philo or a text called Eupolemus. He talks about Belos, who was a giant, who was the son of Kronos. Again, if you know anything about the Titans, Kronos is an important Titan, who gets linked, he gets described as the person who built Babylon and the Tower of Babel. And then other Jewish texts link Belos specifically with Nimrod. And so again, here's how I'm asking you to look at this stuff. Again, I'm not presenting this as, oh, this should be our theology of Antichrist now. What I'm saying is that if you were living in the first century and you were having a conversation with a literate Second Temple Jew, and you were talking about the Antichrist, this is going to be part of his conversation. This is how he's going to perceive this great enemy. And there are parts of it that you can trace into the church fathers. By the way, in that chapter on depravity, Irenaeus and Tyler Stewart would be buddies, because Irenaeus also traced human depravity back to Genesis 6, not just Genesis 3. And again, he's a famous church father. But Irenaeus also tracked on this. He refers to, when he's discussing 666 in his comments about that passage in Revelation 13, he gives a couple speculations for what the number might mean. One of them is Teitan. Teitan by gematria equates out, spells out in Numbers 666. Teitan was one of the words for the Titans. And again, he's getting this from his acquaintance with Second Temple Jewish material. And he goes into the Titan story himself. So Irenaeus is a famous church father that very evidently had taken the time to read lots of this stuff, had probably lots of conversations with Jews or Jewish converts. And again, that helped him look at the Old Testament, look at certain things, even in the New Testament, in a different way. And so Irenaeus is an important figure for this whole discussion, because he's a good indication that Mike isn't just making this stuff up. Okay, he's a good indication that Mike is observing what Irenaeus thought and saying, hey, that's kind of interesting. Where did he get that? Where did he come up with that? And you can, again, trace the series of thoughts back in the primary texts. The second chapter of this section is about different things in the book of Revelation. Revelation 9 I talk about because it has very, very explicit imagery to the release of the Watchers. Again, connecting that this is the release of the guys from the pit, from the abyss. And there are things in the passage that link back into Enochian material. The 144,000 is kind of interesting. I personally would still put this, I'd need to see more on it. I'd still sort of file this as in Mike's head, sort of speculative, but I put it in the book. There's an article by a guy who, it's actually two people, who published in a journal from South Africa. And it's a very long article, it's very detailed, but here's their view. They pick up on, when the 144,000 are described, they are described as being virgins who have not defiled themselves with women. And you think, well, who cares? So what? I mean, it was okay to get married in the Old and New Testament. Big deal. Well, what they try to demonstrate, and I think, again, they present what I'd call a reasonable circumstantial case for it. At least that's my thinking now. There are certain things in the description in Revelation 7 and Revelation 14 about the 144,000 that link back to Levitical language, the way priests were described. And we know priests were allowed to marry. So the question for them then becomes, why this statement? He believes that the 144,000 are people selected by God to, he doesn't believe they're just humans, okay? They sort of waffle there because they differentiate them from the souls that are martyred under the throne and whatnot. But he thinks they are deliberately there to be representatives of God, and they are presented as, pure in terms of these are heavenly ones who have not defiled themselves with women. In other words, they are the counterparts to the Watchers who just got released. And so they are part of this cosmic Armageddon conflict, the war between gods and men. Okay. Again, I think they build a good circumstantial case for it. I'm not completely persuaded of it yet. But I thought it was worth putting in. The Antichrist from Dan tradition. This is also the 144,000. Oh, there's 12,000 from every tribe. What could be simpler? Yeah, until you count the tribes. Until you actually look at the tribes that are missing. Okay. Okay, there's Ephraim. There's a deal with Ephraim and Manasseh going on there, but the one that's omitted totally is Dan. And so you have this. You have a pretty long church history tradition that the Antichrist would descend from the tribe of Dan. Okay, I don't believe that the point is the tribe of Dan. I think the point is the region of Dan, which is in Bashan. Same name. Okay, so that, again, in the chapter I talk about, well, if we were thinking region instead of tribe, where would that lead us? Because it's Bashan, it's the place of the serpent, in the Old Testament. Talk a little bit about Gog and Armageddon. Again, Gog is the great enemy from the north. Okay, if you remember Unseen Realm, what is it about the north that's important? Saphon. It's the domain of Baal. Okay, that's not a coincidence. Again, to cast Gog in that language, and I do a little bit about, there's a reason I think why Gog has never been identified successfully with a historical person, either in antiquity or currently. Because I think the point is not to direct our attention to a specific person, it's to direct our attention, again, to cosmic evil that will control whoever this Antichrist person is. And so I talk a little bit about that. And if you do that, again, you connect it back to Bashan, and then I go into connections between Gog and the Rephaim. Well, how in Gog are the Rephaim connected? Well, if Gog is coming from, the other parts of the earth, Saphon, and if the Antichrist guy is coming from the same place, that's also the region of the Rephaim, the giants. Again, you can do the math from the rest of that point. Again, it's not hard to connect the ideas once you get that point of geographical orientation. Cosmic north, region of Bashan geographically. And there are specific, again, links to the Titans and one particular Titan, Typhon. Again, there's a whole article on how Daniel 11 is sort of this chronology of the Antichrist that we get, how Daniel 11 tracks on the story of Typhon in Greek, literature, okay, or vice versa, depending on your view of the authorship of Daniel. Okay, there are a number of connections, and why that's important is because the figure of Daniel 11, historically, everybody, whether they think Daniel was written in the 6th century, the 2nd century, everybody agrees that the person who fulfilled all of these things in Daniel 11 already, and will, that'll echo out into a future prophecy, is who? Everybody remember the name? Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, who is the Typhon figure in Greek literature. Again, if you're a literate Second Temple Jew, you're familiar with Hellenistic material, these are not coincidences. They all mean something. They're all part of a matrix of ideas. So it's a way to connect the Antichrist to another one of these Watcher, Titan, giant, supernatural bad guys. And so that's what I do in the chapter. Again, I'm just trying to show you in these 2 chapters how a Second Temple person who had knowledge of this material, how they would read Revelation. Not how Tim LaHaye reads it, okay? Or anybody else, Ritterboss or whoever. How would a Second Temple Jew read it? What thoughts would they think? What would pop out of their mouth in discussion if you had that guy in your small group study on Revelation? What he's going to be talking about is just going to frighten everybody else in the room. Okay? Because he is just on a totally different track. Because he has lots of this stuff floating around his head. And the last thing is the lake of fire. That language comes really explicitly out of Enoch. Lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Okay, this is where they're sent. They're sent to the abyss. Who's sent there? Well, the only ones we know that were actually sent there are the Watchers, and who else do we find there in the Old Testament? The Rephaim. Again, these things are not coincidences. They're not just random occurrences in the text. You have people, John writing Revelation, hooking you back into the Old Testament, hooking you back into Second Temple literature that he assumes you know. If you're literate, you know this. I don't have to spell everything out for you. Our problem is we don't know that stuff because we haven't read it. We can have it, we can read it, but anything that scholars would think is Enochian and try to get that in your head, and it's like, okay, now let's go to these New Testament places and just see what pops out to you.
There's another issue that surprises me that more experts, people who have really specialized in this field, have not seen the discernment. And that's the distinction between fallen angels and demons. All through the Bible we find fallen angels. We just talked a lot about them so far today. When you get the New Testament, you run into these strange things that we generally call demons. Are they equivalent or are they distinctive? There are experts, Merrill Unger being one of them, that are really, that's their world, is demonology, that don't make the distinction I'm going to suggest to you here, so you have to decide for yourself. The nature of angels. What do we know about angels? We'll go through the Bible, we discover they always appear in human form. They never look like anything. They don't look like lizards or elephants. They normally look like they're in human form. At Sodom and Gomorrah, they're always in pairs too, usually, by the way. Sodom and Gomorrah, remember? At the resurrection, they were there, a couple of them. At the ascension, there's a couple of them, right? Always look like men, right? They spoke so you could understand them. They took men by the hand. They ate meals with them, right? Paul even admonishes you in his New Testament epistles in terms of hospitality. Many of you have entertained angels unawares. That's Paul's perception there, okay? They are capable of direct physical combat. The Passover in Egypt was accomplished by an angel doing the Lord's bidding. Angel of death is referred to in some places. One night after dinner, one angel slaughters 185,000 Syrian soldiers. I don't know how many soldiers were there. It wouldn't surprise me if there were twice that many if they slit every other throat. That's what the Turks used to do, just to scare everybody to death. You wake up in the morning and find every other, that's demoralizing to a group. Because the word gets around, see? But anyway, the slaughter of 185,000. You don't mess with angels. By the way, Jesus said they don't marry. That causes a lot of confusion. I'll come back to that. He says the angels in heaven don't marry. but angels are always referred to in the masculine. And you say, well, that's just a figure of speech. No. Study carefully Genesis 19. What the homosexuals of that city wanted Lot to deliver his guests. So they dropped out. I don't have to get more graphic than that. Now, in contrast to these things, when we run into demons in the New Testament, they're very different. They seem to be powerless except to the extent they can indwell someone. They apparently always seek embodiment. That's why they petitioned to go into the swine and all that, at Gadara. You know the story. Jesus said, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God. He's referring to believers. In the resurrection, they neither marry or are given in marriage, but are as angels of God in heaven. Meaning, what he means by that is they are immortal. Someone that is mortal needs to procreate. Someone that's immortal doesn't procreate. That's his point. Now, he doesn't say, he's talking about the angels that are in heaven, the ones that are well behaved. I personally would not put any limitations on the technology available to an angel that's bent on mischief. That's my real point, I think. The word habitation, I've covered this before, the akaterion refers to the body as a dwelling place for the spirit. It occurs only twice. In Jude 6, which the angels disrobed, and in 2 Corinthians 5:2, the heavenly body to which we as believers long to be clothed with. And the word habitation in one place is the same as the word house in the other place.
The gates of Hades. What's a gate? Something goes in and out of. Something's coming back through the gates of Hades. What's the fourth horse? The fourth horseman of the apocalypse. Gray horse, pale horse. Its rider is death. What follows him? Hades. What does that mean? That means Tartarus is going to be opened up in the last days. That's Joel chapter 2. The locust of Joel chapter 2. There's a whole bunch of people in the body of Christ out there thinking that and Sarah Palin's one of them, thinking that they are the Joel 2 army. I'm like, guys, read Joel chapter 2. That is not a description of believers. That is a description of the Nephilim army. It's the locusts that come out of the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 9. The 200 million man army, they're not the Chinese, they're not the Muslims, they're not the Russians. And the description, they don't look like anything like people. The 200 million man army of Revelation are the 200 million locusts that are coming out of the gates of Hades. But if we understand this revelation, they will not overcome it, us. But you got to understand it first, right? You got to know what you're fighting, right?
The angel view of Genesis 6. I'm trying to emphasize it only because you're going to discover that its understanding will be essential to understand what really happened in the book of Joshua, what really happened all through the scripture, and what Isaiah means when he talks about the Rephaim, that they're not eligible for resurrection, and so forth. It pervades the whole scripture. And especially you have no ability to understand what Jesus meant when he says, as the days of Noah were, so shall the days of the coming of the Son of Man be.